The first thing Maren Voss noticed about the planet was that it had no maps. She found that out the hard the way she found out most things, standing in the wreckage of her survey pod at the bottom of a ravine, one arm pressed against a cracked rib, the other holding her navigation tablet at an angle that suggested the gyroscope had given up. The planet's name in the colonial registry was HR 7441C. The locals, she would later learn, called it something older, something that didn't translate well through the comms array. The closest the translation matrix could manage was the place where the eyelids are heavy. She had been mapping the outer rim for 11 years. She had walked through ammonia fog on Kepler's third sister, had bribed 3 different species to let her survey their breeding grounds, had once spent a week living inside a dead Halvari scout shell, eating nutrient paste from a tube, while she finished charting a ridge system that nobody had asked her to chart, and nobody was going to pay her to chart, but which was going to matter someday, to somebody who needed to get from one side of a mountain to the other. That was the thing about maps. They mattered before anyone knew they mattered. She climbed out of the ravine with her tablet under her arm and her broken rib grinding with every step, and she found the village at sunset. It was built in a bowl of land between 2 ridges, the kind of terrain that trapped weather and held it like a cupped hand. Structures of dark veined stone rose in uneven clusters, smoke threading from chimney tops into a sky the color of old iron. The inhabitants, there were perhaps 300 of them, the tablet estimated, were humanoid in the broad sense. 2 legs, 2 arms, bilateral symmetry, but their skin absorbed light rather than reflecting it, giving them the quality of shapes cut from dark cloth, and their eyes held a luminescence that flickered when they turned toward her, like the pilot lights on a gas burner, like something deciding whether to ignite. They did not attack her. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was the priest. He was tall, with the architectural quality of someone who had spent a long time convincing others to look up at him. His robes were the same color as the stone, and he wore around his neck a device that Maren's tablet tentatively identified as some form of resonance amplifier, old technology, badly calibrated, the kind of thing you used when you wanted people to feel fear without understanding its source. He spoke in a language the Matrix struggled with, but the elder woman who guided Maren to the village's edge translated in halting galactic standard. He says you are a devil's messenger. He says your machine, she meant the tablet, draws the shape of things that should not be shaped. I'm a cartographer, Maren said. I make maps, the elder translated. The priest's expression did not change, which told Maren more than if it had. He smips the first act of conquest. Maren thought about arguing. She had learned, across 11 years and 47 planets, that arguing with someone who controls the local food supply was a low percentage play. She put the tablet under her arm and smiled the smile she used for orbital customs officials and angry landowners and every other variety of territorial being in the known galaxy. Tell him I'm just passing through, she said. I need a place to sleep and someone to look at this rib. They gave her a room in a stone building near the village edge. Not out of hospitality, she understood, but because the center of the village was apparently the place you didn't put strangers. The woman who brought her food was young, with luminescent eyes that stayed very still when they looked at Maren's tablet, the kind of stillness that is not the absence of feeling, but the disciplined containment of it. Her name, the elder had said, was Nasha. Nasha watched Maren eat. Maren let her. Outside, the wind moved through the valley with a sound like something breathing. And then after dark, there were other sounds. Not wind, not animal. Something that moved at the edges of auditory range, testing the frequency where perception blurred into imagination, where the brain's pattern recognition outpaced its skepticism. Maren had slept through worse. She was a cartographer. You developed a tolerance for things that went wrong in the dark. In the morning, she climbed the ridge, not because anyone told her to, because the village had a sight line, and sight lines told you things. She could see, from the top of the eastern ridge, the entire valley, the village in its bowl, the road that wound through the lowland marsh, the dark cluster of structures at the valley's far end that looked like they had been sealed rather than abandoned. And she could see from the geometry of the terrain that this valley had been here for a very long time without anything passing through it. That was strange. Valleys with road access didn't stay off charts for centuries by accident. They stayed off charts because someone kept them off charts. She was still working through the implications of this when the priest's men came to take her tablet. There were 4 of them, and they were polite about it, the way people are polite when they're confident. She let them take the tablet. She had a secondary unit in her boot, and a tertiary backup encoded in a patch on her shoulder, because she was a cartographer, and 11 years had taught her that the thing most likely to get you killed was being reducible to a single point of failure. She watched them carry it away, and she thought about the resonance amplifier around the priest's neck, and the sealed buildings at the valley's far end, and the elder's careful translation of draws the shape of things that should not be shaped. And then she thought about the sound in the dark. Nasha found her on the ridge in the early afternoon. The girl moved without her pilot light eyes giving much away. But she sat beside Marin and looked at the sealed buildings for a long time before she spoke. Panok. The name came out carefully, the way you say a word you've been warned about. She was the Lord Father's daughter. She died in the church 1 year ago. Marin waited. Father Pacius said she was a witch. He said she had opened a door. He said the things that came through her door could only be stopped by prayers and by fear. Nasha paused. He told us this every day. We became very good at being afraid. That's useful for a priest, Marin said. Nasha's eyes flickered. Not with offense, with something more complex than offense. With the expression of someone hearing articulated for the first time something they have long understood in their gut. The things in the dark, she said. I know what they are. She did not say more then. She had the instincts of someone who had survived by rationing information, dispensing it only when the recipient could be trusted to use it well. Marin understood this. She had the instincts of someone who had survived by making it worth people's while to trust her. I'm getting my tablet back, Marin said. Tonight. You can come with me if you want to show me what's in those buildings. She expected hesitation. She got the fastest nod she'd received on 47 planets. The priest's compound was in the center of the village, and getting into it was a problem that Marin solved the way she solved most problems, by drawing it first. She had no tablet, but she had a piece of burned wood and the back of a supply wrapper and 11 years of spatial memory that could reconstruct the layout of a building from one pass of her eyes in good light. She drew the compound from memory, marked the points where the guards overlapped in their rotation, identified the 2 windows that faced the wrong direction for anyone inside to watch, and then handed the drawing to Nasha, who studied it for 40 seconds and made one correction. There's a basement, Nasha said, pointing. Pacis has a machine down there, old Survey Corps equipment from before. He uses it to make the sounds. Marin looked at her. The sounds in the dark, Nasha said. The breathing, the things that move at the edges. It's a low-frequency oscillator. Colonial Survey Standard issue, 3rd generation. She paused. I found the manual in the sealed buildings when I was 8. I've had a long time to think about it. Marin was quiet for a moment. 11 years of strange planets, and she still felt it sometimes. That particular quality of awe you got when you realized the person you'd been talking to was carrying a library behind their eyes that had cost them everything to compile. Show me, she said. They went in through the misdirected windows. The tablet was where she expected it. On a shelf in what passed for the priest's study, still powered down, surrounded by objects arranged to suggest mystical significance. The oscillator was in the basement, exactly where Nasha had drawn it. A Survey Corps Model 7, which Marin recognized immediately because she'd used the same model on the moons of Drea Station in her 4th year. It was old equipment. It worked by exploiting the fact that the human nervous system, and most bilaterally symmetric nervous systems in the known galaxy, had evolved to interpret low-frequency sound as the presence of a large predator. Not a sound you heard so much as felt in the walls of your chest. Not a message from the environment. A message from the deep past, before your ancestors had language. Something big is coming and it knows where you are. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at the walls, at the cables running up through the stone to the surface, at the coverage map taped to the wall beside the unit. A hand-drawn map, actually a crude one, but recognizable as an attempt to chart the propagation of the signal through the valley's specific geology. Paisius had made a map. Of course he had. He just hadn't understood what maps were for. She took photographs with the tablet's secondary sensor, and then she and Nasha left the way they'd come. The next part was harder. Nasha had said the things in the dark she'd said she knew what they were. And when they were back in Marin's room at the village edge, with the tablet propped against the wall, and the burned wood map spread on the floor between them, Nasha told her about Panok, not as she'd heard it from the priest, as she'd seen it. Panok had been, by Nasha's account, a young woman of considerable curiosity and a particular gift for understanding the old structures at the valley's end. The sealed buildings weren't sealed because they were cursed. They were sealed because they were old Survey Corps structures from an abandoned colonial assessment 400 years ago, and the equipment inside was still partially functional. And Panok had spent 2 years learning to read the interface. And then Paisius had found out, and Panok had died. He said she opened a door to hell, Nasha said. He said demons came through. He said he prayed for 3 days and fought them back. But what you saw? I saw him use the oscillator. I saw the Survey Corps suit he wore with the optical enhancement array. It makes your eyes seem to multiply when the light hits it. We're wrong. I was 8. I believed it for 4 years. She was quiet. Then I found the manual. Marin thought about the priest and his resonance amplifier, and his hand-drawn coverage map. She thought about how long it had worked. A year since Panok's death. 300 people in a valley with no access to outside information, with no maps that showed them where they were relative to the rest of the world, knowing only that their priest stood between them and the dark. Maps are the first act of conquest, he'd said. Yes, she thought, that's exactly right. She was up before dawn. Nasha was already waiting at the base of the ridge, waiting with 11 other people, the ones she'd spent a year talking to, in careful rationed exchanges, the ones who had their own collections of evidence and their own quiet doubts, and who only needed someone to show them the geometry of what they were standing inside. Marin had her tablet. She had her secondary sensor and her tertiary backup, and 11 years of maps rolled into her shoulder patch. She had a coverage diagram of the oscillator's propagation pattern, and a structural survey of the sealed buildings, and a legal template she'd pulled from the colonial registry. Standard Survey Corps land use documentation, the kind that, when filed properly, superseded local governance authority. She had made overnight a complete map of the valley. The priest came out of his compound at sunrise to find it posted on the wall of the village's central structure. Not on paper, but projected from her tablet's display array onto the stone itself. Every building marked, every road, the oscillator's location, its specifications, its coverage radius, the sealed buildings and their colonial registration numbers, the route to the nearest transit hub, which was 4 days away on foot, and which nobody in the village had known existed. The map was the argument. She didn't need to say anything else. Paisius had a good face for authority, a face trained to show certainty as a form of weather, to make doubt feel like a personal failing in the observer. He looked at the map and she saw the exact moment he understood what had changed, not that she had beaten him. That was a story about 2 people. What had changed was larger than that. She had given everyone else the thing he'd been hoarding: information, location, context. The knowledge of where you are. He tried the resonance amplifier. She could feel it, the low thrum, in the chest cavity, the ancient predator's signal telling her brainstem that something enormous was present. She breathed through it. 11 years on strange planets had given her a high baseline for existential dread, and she had learned that the limbic system's panic signals were data, not instruction. She kept the tablet pointed at the wall. The 11 people Nasha had brought held their ground. They'd known this feeling their whole lives. They knew now what it was. The knowledge didn't make it comfortable. It made it survivable. Paisius spoke at length. The translation matrix strained. He was reaching for cadences that bypassed argument, that appealed to the part of a listener that predated language. He was good at it. She could feel it working on her, even knowing what it was. That was the thing nobody told you about Fafir that had been weaponized. Understanding the mechanism didn't make the weapon inert. It just gave you something to hold on to while the weapon fired. She held on to the map. Later, the elder, her name was Dara, which Marin hadn't learned until that morning, told her that Paisius had used the Survey Corps suit once more in those final moments, switching on the optical array so that his eyes seemed to multiply and fracture in the dim morning light, so that he appeared for a few seconds like something ancient and many-eyed and vast. Marin had seen it. She'd noted it, logged it, photographed it for the colonial registry, and then she'd taken a step forward. Not brave. Just, there were only 2 directions, toward or away. She had been moving toward things for 11 years. It was not a philosophical position. It was a habit. He was arrested by the colonial authority 6 weeks later, after the transit route opened and the first relay station came online, and the valley's residents filed their testimony. Marin was 3 systems away by then, mapping a ridgeline on a moon nobody had named yet. She sent Nasha a copy of the finished valley survey, complete, accurate, indexed to the colonial registry. The sealed buildings, it turned out, contained intact botanical survey data from the original colonial assessment. 400 years of climate records and soil analysis that the agritech programs had been looking for. The response came back 3 weeks later, which was fast for that part of the rim. We opened the buildings. There is a great deal to learn. Dara is learning it. Some of us knew how to ask questions but not where to look. We are looking now. You should see what it looks like here in the spring. It does not look like a place where the eyelids are heavy. It looks like every other thing in the world that is difficult to understand until someone draws the shape of it. Come back and make another map. Marin read the message sitting in the survey pod above a nameless moon, the ridgeline half finished on her tablet. The planet's curve, filling the viewport behind her. She read it twice. She had long since stopped trying to explain to people what it was that made cartography worth anything. The answer was too simple, and simple things always sounded small. You made the map, so the next person knew where they were standing. She thought about Panok, who had died for reading the interface of a 400-year-old machine, who had wanted to know the shape of things, who had been, by every account, the kind of person who found manuals in sealed buildings and spent 2 years working through them alone, not because anyone would reward her for it, but because the question would not leave her alone. Marin had met that kind of person before. She had been that kind of person before. She recognized the particular stubbornness of it. Not bravery, not heroism, just the specific human inability to let a door stay sealed when you could still see the hinges. She saved Nasha's message in the archive she kept, for the places that had mattered. It was a long archive. It was getting longer. She pulled the tablet up and finished the ridgeline. Outside, the nameless moon turned slowly in the dark, and somewhere on its surface there were valleys waiting to be shaped into language, waiting to be given the dignity of being located, of being findable, of being known. She had enough battery for 6 more hours. She had enough food for 4 days. She had, somewhere in the supply locker, a spare rib brace and 2 tubes of nutrient paste, and a flask of something a trader on Kepler's third sister had given her 4 years ago, that she was saving for no reason she could articulate, except that some things deserved a specific occasion. The occasion, she decided, was now. She drank half the flask and got back to work.